Okay, in this unit, we're going to be getting into heredity, talking about what that is, and genetics, looking at genes that are passed down from parents to offspring, which ones show up in something called phenotype, which ones stay in the genotype, who it was the person that first discovered these things. So let's go ahead and get started with this topic. If you think about it, why do you look like the way that you do? Maybe you have brown eyes, but your parents have blue eyes. Maybe you're really tall and you have a brother or sister that's short, or vice versa. Maybe you're the only one in your immediate family that has blonde hair, and everyone else has brown hair. So what causes these things? Why are these things the way they are? Well, science can help answer some of these questions, okay? And it all ties into a couple of topics that we're going to be looking at. One's heredity. Heredity is just those characteristics that are passed on from parents to offspring. Okay, remember when we talked about meiosis, the formation of sperm and egg, and then how different chromosomes are going to be arranged into those individual sperm and egg. And so those chromosomes are what's carrying those characteristics. And then genetics is going to be that branch that's going to be studying this. So we're going to be looking at what characteristics, what chromosomes you actually got from mom, and which ones you actually got from dad, which ones you inherited, which ones were passed on to you, and that's why you look and maybe internally, externally are designed the way you are. Okay, as far as background information goes, there was a monk botanist that originally discovered heredity and discovered that there were genes passed on from one generation to the next, and his name was Gregor Mendel. He's known as the father of genetics because he was the one that first carried out experiments that were successful in determining that there were traits passed on from parents to offspring. Sometimes these traits showed up in the physical characteristics of that offspring. Sometimes they were hidden in the background and they showed up later. But he was the one that began the studying on this particular subject. He originally started looking at mice. They frowned on using animal experimentation, so he changed from looking at mice. Tried out bees, but eventually what he really found were that his study with pea plants is when he really came to some of these discoveries as far as looking at inherited traits. He did find that a regular garden pea, a pea plant, is a really good subject for several reasons. It has characteristics that are clear as far as physical characteristics. You can definitely notice the differences. The male and female parts of a pea plant are very distinct, so they're easy to be noticed. They're easy to be controlled, and they grow really quickly. They mature really quickly, so it doesn't take a long time to see the results, and they can produce a lot of offspring. So there were a lot of these reasons were why pea plants kind of came about as the ideal subject to study for his experiments and when he was looking at these inherited traits. All right, so let's look at Mendel's theory of heredity. Okay, through his experiments, he found that for each inherited character or each inherited characteristic, an individual is going to have two copies, one from each parent. Okay, so for example, the inherited characteristic for eye color, you're going to have two copies of that gene that you inherit. One's going to come from mom and one's going to come from dad. They're going to be considered different versions of a gene. Okay, so the gene you get for eye color from mom and the gene you get from eye color from dad, for example, they're different versions even though they're for the same characteristic. So we're going to call them alleles. Okay, and the third part of his theory of heredity is that when these two different alleles occur together, one's always going to be expressed which means one's always going to show up in the physical makeup of that organism, while the other one might not be observable and it might not have an effect on the appearance, but it's still going to be there in the genetic makeup. We call these dominant and recessive. Okay, the alleles that show up in the expressed characteristics or in the physical characteristics of that organism, they're going to be called dominant alleles. So that means that the trait is actually showing up in the physical makeup. The alleles that are not showing up, but they're still passed on from parent to offspring, those are going to be called recessive. All right, now the fourth part of his theory is that when these gametes form, remember the gametes are the sperm and egg of an organism, when these gametes form, the alleles for each gene are going to separate. Okay, one's going to go to one gamete, one's going to go to the other. So the separation of these alleles, the separation of these chromatids during meiosis is going to help determine which characteristics are going to show up as far as inherited characteristics are going to show up in your physical and your genetic makeup. Right, so those are the four main parts to Mendel's theory of heredity that he came up with through his experiments with those pea plants. So modern terminology, I was talking about physical makeup versus genetic makeup. Well, we have terms for those. The genetic makeup of an organism, all of the chromatids that when they separate to go into the different gametes, and then they get passed on, and then you get one gene for each trait that you have from each parent. Okay, so these alleles, the genotype is going to be made up of those alleles. Okay, so say you got a gene for brown eye color from mom and a gene for blue eye color from dad. Those are alleles because they code, or they're genes for the same trait. That's part of your genetic makeup because you got both of those genes. The phenotype is a term that we're going to use when we talk about the physical appearance of the organism. What genes show up in the physical appearance? So what genes are going to show up in the phenotype? Say you got an allele for gene color from mom for eye color that is brown, and you got one from dad that is blue, and you have brown eyes. So your phenotype for eye color would be brown. Some more terminology, homozygous versus heterozygous. Okay, if you got, let's stick with eye color. Let's say you got an allele for eye color that's brown from mom and one from dad that is brown. So they're the same allele, which means you're going to be homozygous for that particular trait because they're two alleles that they're going to show the same characteristic. They're going to carry the same characteristic. Whereas heterozygous would mean you got two different alleles. You got a gene for brown eyes from mom and a gene for blue eyes from dad, so they're different alleles. So that means you would be heterozygous for eye color because you got two different alleles for the characteristics of your eye color. Okay, so let's start looking at how this heredity process works. Okay, let's focus on the pea plant process. Okay, let me put this up real quick. Let's say that one parent passed on purple for the color of the petals of the plant, and another parent passed on purple for the color of petals for the plant. So the offspring received the gene for purple petals from both parents, so that particular genotype would be homozygous for the purple petals of the flower. Okay, let's say in a different example, one parent passed on purple flowers or purple petals for the flower. Another parent passed on white petals for the flower. Now the purple might have still shown up, or the flower might have still shown up purple. However, it received purple from one parent and white colored petals from another parent. So its genotype is going to be represented by a capital P, lowercase p, which means it is heterozygous, because even though it received petal color from both parents, it's different colors. And then in the last example, okay, say you had two parents, flower parents, and they both had white petals, and so they both passed on white petals to the offspring, so the offspring is going to have white petals. Then the end result would be that the offspring is homozygous for white petal color for its flower. Okay, dominant. If you go back to this last picture, dominant genes or dominant alleles are going to be represented by uppercase letters. Recessive genes, which are the genes that are passed on but they don't show up in the phenotype, are going to be represented by a lowercase letter. So if an organism is heterozygous for a trait, that is going to be represented by an uppercase letter and a lowercase letter because it carries both alleles. If it's homozygous for a trait, it could be two uppercase letters, or in this case of the white petal, it could be two lowercase letters.